Follow Famous and Gravy on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Famous and Gravy early and ad-free now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
We all know playtime and problem solving as a kid is super important. That's why KiwiCo is launching KiwiCo Clubs to engage kids on a journey of seriously fun learning. With KiwiCo Clubs, kids will learn the fundamentals through hands-on projects and progressively build their skills with each new project they work on. Watch your kids go from learning to build bows and arrows to engineering their own robot. KiwiCo has 5 clubs with unique topics like science, technology, engineering, art, and math, otherwise known as STEAM, that encourage kids to be creative, bold, curious, and persistent through hands-on play and projects. Tinker, create, and innovate with KiwiCo. Get up to 50% off your first crate at kiwico.com. Promo code WONDERY. That's up to 50% off your first crate at kiwico.com. Promo code WONDERY.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This is Famous and Gravy, biographies from a different point of view. To participate in our opening quiz, email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. Now here's the quiz to reveal today's dead celebrity.
This person died 2020, age 93. He was the only child of a noted beat poet who left the family when this person was 6 years old.
No idea. Jack Kerouac Jr.
Not Jack Kerouac Jr., who, as far as I know, is not a real person. Okay. On several occasions, he recounted a period of months that he spent in Paris earning a living as a mech, or a pimp, for a young prostitute.
Oh, goodness gracious. You know, I think Paris and I immediately think George Plimpton, but I don't think pimp.
It's not former pimp George Plimpton. He won his first professional acting job in the 1940s when the live radio program The Lone Ranger cast him as the voice of Dan Reed, nephew of that Western's intrepid title character.
I was going to say Clint Eastwood, but Clint Eastwood is still going.
Not Clint Eastwood. He was a knowledgeable interviewer who focused on craft while avoiding gossip.
Somebody from 60 Minutes. It's got to be somebody from 60 Minutes. Walter Cronkite.
Not Walter Cronkite.
Oh, Dick Cavett?
Not Dick Cavett, who actually, as of this recording, is still with us.
That's impossible.
I'm telling you, he's in his 90s and he's still with us, as of this recording. On television, he was lampooned relentlessly by Will Ferrell on Saturday Night Live.
Oh no. I know this guy's name. It's the Inside the Actors Studio guy. Oh. James Lipton? James Lipton.
Today's dead celebrity is James Lipton.
What is your favorite word?
Honor.
What is your least favorite word?
The N word, no matter who says it.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Words. They're our most precious natural resource.
What turns you off?
Humiliation, especially toward a defenseless child.
What sound or noise do you love?
Silence. The most underestimated quality of life.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The din that passes for fun in many public places today.
What is your favorite curse word?
It's neither obscene nor scatological. It's profane, but offensive to some, and so I apologize. When I'm really upset, I say, Jesus Christ.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would like to be a premier danseur, but forever young and never injured.
What profession would you not like to do?
That's easy. Executioner.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You see, Jim, you were wrong. I exist, but you may come in anyway.
Welcome to Famous and Gravy. I'm Michael Osborne.
And I'm Amit Kapoor.
And on this show, we choose a famous figure who died in the 21st century, and we take a totally different approach to their biography. What didn't we know? What could we not see clearly? And what does a celebrity's life story teach us about ourselves? Today, James Lipton. Died 2020, age 93. Category 1, grading the first line of their obituary. James Lipton, who plumbed the dramatic arts through perceptive, mostly admiring interviews with celebrity actors as host of the Bravo television series Inside the Actor's Studio, died on Monday at his home in Manhattan. He was 93.
Was that a dig?
Dude, there's a couple digs.
Like, was the whole thing a dig?
What do you mean? Say more.
I mean, it just kind of sounds a little pejorative.
The mostly admiring
Mostly
part?
admiring, because that sticks out the most.
That's the first thing that feels like a dig. You know, it starts off nice. Plumbed the dramatic arts through perceptive.
I thought plumbed was a negative word until I looked it up.
Because it means like you're going down into the plumbing?
Yeah, exactly. There's any connotation around the word plumbing typically means filth of some sort. But no, it's actually like the definition of plumbed is to explore or experience fully or to extreme. So it's actually very appropriate.
But you're right. There is a little bit of like, were we in the muck here? Perceptive. I like the word perceptive. He is absolutely that. And this is the high compliment of this first line.
Totally.
Mostly admiring interviews. I have a lot to say on that. I think, one, yes, it is a dig. And two, it's a dig because he was supposed to be doing something else? Like
that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Right. Are they actually, or are they paying him the dues that he wanted, which is like, I am not a journalist and I am doing admiring interviews because in this actor studio class, the criteria is, do these people have something to teach my students?
Right.
So they are going to be already admired by the fact that they were invited onto the show to begin with.
Why say this? It's like, this is unnecessary commentary. I mean, you could have just said interviews that focused on the craft of entertainment or whatever.
Craft was the word that I think belongs in here somewhere.
Mostly admiring has this, he was really deferential. He wasn't very good at this, you know?
It's a journalist attacking a journalist,
well,
I think.
But he's not a journalist.
That's exactly my point.
And he was also very clear on that. This criticism came a lot throughout the years of Inside the Actor's Studio.
Yes.
Why are you not digging more deeply? That is not what I'm here to do. I'm not a journalist. I don't claim to be a journalist.
Yes.
I am here to focus on craft.
I'm a teacher on top of that. Like, not only am I not a journalist, I'm not even pretending to be one on TV.
Yeah, so you and I are both aligned that, one, this is a criticism. Two, it doesn't belong.
I agree. And can we sidestep for a second? Because I don't think everybody understands that the show was a class.
Okay, so
rather than it actually being a show. Let's just take a second to do it.
Well, okay. I mean, we'll get into his whole life story leading up to the Actor Studio, but essentially what happened is that there is this thing called the Actor Studio, which was, the way he describes it, my favorite analogy, he said it was almost like an elite gym for great actors, right? It was a place where dedicated, well-known, famous actors would come and train, and the list is astonishing. Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe, Paul Newman, Pacino, and on and on and on. Like, it's like the cream of the crop, but it didn't have a business model and it was threatened with a closing. And Lipton came up with this idea of, what if we offered a program that was a training program for students, an MFA.
Which was actually a master's program.
And they initially collaborated with the New School in the early 90s. And as part of this collaboration with the New School in New York, he said, we should also think about a seminar where we invite these very well-regarded actors and people in entertainment broadly to participate in conversations, and why don't we make this a TV show? So he brought Bravo on board. Lipton organized all of that, and in so doing, saved the Actor Studio from folding under. And then this is how this TV show was created, Inside the Actor Studio, where he would have in-depth conversations with performers and artists about their craft.
Yeah, so what we're actually watching is just an edited version of a class.
Correct. He would also say these interviews would go 4, 5, 6 hours sometimes, and we'd watch 1 hour, maybe 2 hours specials occasionally.
Yeah. Okay. I thought that was necessary, but let's go back to
I think you're right. That is necessary context, because mostly admiring interviews, they're taking a dig at the approach of interviewing where it's not wrong, but it just sounds like, why say that? It's just so unnecessary. Okay. I got one other dig here too.
Okay.
With celebrity actors, it's not just actors. He's talking to comedians. He's talking to directors, musicians.
Your father was a computer scientist. Your mother was a musician. When the spaceship lands, how do they communicate?
That's a very good question. I like that. You've answered the question.
They make music on their computers, and they are able to speak to each other.
You see, I'd love to say, I intended that and I realized that was my mother and father, but not until this moment.
So we just explained that the show was actually a class.
Yeah.
So James Lipton wasn't really a television host. He was a dean and a professor.
Correct.
Right, who happened to have a televised class. But my question is, does that belong at all here?
His backstory?
Not his backstory, that this wasn't even really his primary function of his job.
So actually on this one, I'd give the obit writers in the New York Times a pass. I do think that the one thing this obit line is doing is saying this is what you know this guy for.
Yeah, which is what we've talked about repeatedly.
Correct.
So it's okay then, in your view.
I guess, although I will say before you and I sat down to record, my main point of frustration with this first line is that it does nothing to hint at his backstory, which is fascinating. Like, we're going to get into it and I can't wait. But this does not hook or intrigue in any way. This guy died who you kind of know from that thing that was on Bravo. And that's it. Like, it's very dismissive of what I think is a very intriguing life. I'm ready to give my score.
Okay.
I'm giving it a 4. I'm not going from 10 working backwards. I'm going from 0 working up. You get 4 points for the this guy for this thing. And I do like that they talked about plumbing the dramatic arts through perceptive interviews.
Yeah.
Everything else, it falls short in terms of the service he did to the entertainment industry, to the craft of acting, to what he did to save the Actors Studio, and to just how unbelievably interesting his life story is. It's missing all of that.
Okay. You've accused me of being too generous lately. So here is my turn. I'm giving it a 3.
All right.
So I think we agree we don't like
the depths of our grades.
That we don't. I think we both agree we don't understand the point of including mostly admiring.
Yeah.
I like that you highlighted the celebrity actors versus the entire field of entertainment. I actually like plus points for duping me with plumbed, because I think that's a very James Lipton thing to do, because he was such a vocabulary guy.
Totally.
And unlike you, I agree that the job of the first line should be what we know them for, but I still think they could parenthetically say James Lipton, who has dean of the new school, plumbed the dramatic arts in blah, 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 blah. And yet another one of our celebrities who has died at his home in Manhattan.
He's very Manhattan.
He is very, very Manhattan. Yeah.
Like elite fine arts, New York.
Yes.
All right. Category 2, 5 things I love about you. Here, Amit and I develop a list of 5 things that offer a different angle on who this person was and how they lived.
I think you have to go first.
Okay. Thank you. I don't even know how to contain my thing number 1, but I want to nominate him, not award him, but nominate him for the Jonathan Goldsmith Award for Most Interesting Man in the World. Jonathan Goldsmith was the man who played the most interesting man in the world on the Dos Equis commercials back in the day.
Stay thirsty, my friends.
You nominated somebody else for this.
I can't remember who. I thought I did.
I think it was Leonard Cohen.
Might have been. James Lipton, I think, might win it. It's what is so freaking fun about his story is how much sort of toss aside little trivia sprinkles his entire biography.
Yes.
That he was the son of a beat poet. His father, Lawrence Lipton, was no joke as a beat poet. Like, he owned Santa Monica, the beat scene in the early 60s.
And his landmark book, The Holy Barbarians, was huge.
Correct. James was a prodigy. He apparently learned to read at the age of 1.5 and wrote poetry at 3, had completed 3 novels by the age of 12.
This whole thing very like Rushmore.
Totally. This whole thing about him being a mech, a pimp.
A mech, short for macro. We would say pimp, but there's a difference. Anyway, to make a long story short, she was beautiful. She was Cannoise. And she looked like those young women you and I have seen on the beach at Cannes, those exquisite young French women. We became great friends. And one night I told her I had to go back to New York. And she said, "You're broke, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Problem solved. You'll be my mech." Well, she arranged it. It had to be arranged because if you freelanced in that area, they found you floating in the Seine. And I began a new career as a mech.
Here's one. I'm just going to throw out a couple things because these may come up later. Pilates. He was not just an early adopter of Pilates. He was friends with Joseph Huberte's Pilates. He was friends with the guy. He was friends with Pilates.
With Joe
Pilates.
That sounds like such a bar joke.
No, he was actually friends with Joe Pilates. When Joe Pilates died, he and the community that was doing Pilates in the 60s in New York were like, we need to franchise this. And they weren't able to do it because Joe Pilates hadn't taken the necessary steps. But he was doing Pilates like back when it was like straps and rubber bands in some random studio in New York.
And shout out to your friend Pilates, by the way.
Shout out to our friend Pilates. The Miss Scarlet thing?
Yes.
So, his wife, whose name I'm still not sure.
It's a beautiful name, Kedekai.
Kedekai, I think is how you say it. She was the model for Miss Scarlet on the Clue
board game
on the board game, on the Parker Brothers Clue game. The likeness of his wife, like every time you're in a Walmart and you see a Clue board, like there's my wife.
Yes.
Modeling for Clue. That he put on the very first presidential inauguration for Jimmy Carter in 1976, this like major gala. And that came because Leonard Bernstein, somehow he was friends with Leonard Bernstein, was like, James, please show up. That he had this relationship with Bob Hope as his producer for years and years. I mean, you could go on and on. There's all this little, like he was neighbors with Kurt Vonnegut and they would apparently copy edit each other's stuff. Like, hey, would you mind giving this a quick read? Like this comes up everywhere with James Lipton. The more you get into his life, it's unbelievable. It's fascinating. So I nominate him for the Jonathan Goldsmith Award for Most Interesting.
And how does he fare against Leonard Cohen then?
I think he fares better because the way the little stories come up, like this is something I enjoy about our friendship, Amit. You'll occasionally be like, ever told you about my friend Bill? And I'll be like, no. And you will have my attention and you will tell me about Bill. And Bill is doing something fascinating in some corner of the world that maybe touches on pop culture, maybe doesn't. This is story rich, right? It's dense with, let me tell you about this one time I was in Barbados, or I was in Paris with Bob Hope, or I was, walking the streets of New York with Kurt Vonnegut. I mean, there's just so much density of stuff I want to hear about that makes for an unbelievably rich life.
Okay, great one.
All right.
Okay, so on to me for number two. He was a lyricist. This guy was basically, he was a rapper, he was a singer, he was Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? He was basically the former contemporary of him. So, you talked about what some of his resume of writing novels before he was 12. He also produced Broadway musicals. I mean, he literally was a lyricist in that regard.
Yes.
But this is a man who loved words. And that's where I think a lot of the parodies and criticism come with the pompousness of James Lipton.
And the Will Ferrell impersonation in particular. Yeah.
Correct. But one of his most lasting legacies was a book called Exultation of Larks.
Yes.
Which he wrote in 1968 and still was republished in 1993 by Penguin, but it's still in continuous print from what I understand.
Yeah.
And this is an exploration of phrases in the human language.
And a lot of it is like describing animals. A gaggle of geese, a pride of lions.
Yes. What was the one we talked about? An acre of dentists.
An acre, some of these he makes up.
I finally compiled all of the original terms with their provenances. That took a lot of digging because most of them are in Middle English. And I fell in love with them, and then I began to invite my own. An acre of dentists. In the 15th century, they said a rascal of boys. So I said an acne of adolescents, a lurch of buses, a slouch of models, an unction of undertakers in a larger group, an extreme unction of undertakers. And I couldn't stop. It was like eating peanuts.
So he has these credentials in terms of Broadway and novels and this book that he wrote, but it comes across in his regular vocabulary.
Yeah.
And so I just pulled a few of the things that I liked that he said. One is, this was in reference to Steven Spielberg, and he says that if Steven Spielberg invited him to something, he would be there in no frames.
Yeah.
Right? He talks about his father, who was a great poet and deficient father.
Yes.
I just love that contradiction. He would say things like, instead of saying that this was a beginning, this was entree, right? Yeah. He was a bit of a Francophile. But the man loved words, and words were what colored his life.
Yeah.
And I like that. I'm a guy who I like music a lot more if it has good lyrics.
Yes.
And that's why I think this guy was a walking, talking example of a lyricist.
That's wonderful. All right. Number 3. Proto-podcaster.
Okay.
This man is a podcaster before everybody else. I don't think we recognize Inside the Actor Studio as a podcast, and I think we should. It's frustrating that you can't get access to all of these conversations, but this is basically a podcast, I think. Here are the similarities. One, he had no previous training as an interviewer. The only reference he makes is that he did actually go to a year of law school. And he said, the only thing I learned in law school is you never ask a question that you don't have a pretty good answer to.
Yes.
he doubled down on his concept. This gets back to that first line, mostly admiring interviews. He said, this is about craft, not gossip. And at one point, the show was, we're going to cancel this unless you listen to what our focus group has to say. The focus group had said, we want a little bit more of their personal lives, and you've got to get rid of the student segment at the end. And James Lipton said, I'm not doing it. The show does not get canceled, but he sticks to his guns that this proto-podcast concept is about the craft of acting. And it's not just acting, as we called out. I love that it was born out of a classroom environment.
Yeah.
Like this, the mission here is to teach, because more than anything else, he is a lifelong student. He studied with Stella Adler, but later was like taking all these acting classes with the greats that had all come from Method and Stanislavski and all that. But he was like sort of addicted to being a student. And that's what a great podcaster is, if you ask me, somebody who is a lifelong student, you know, who just loves the experience of learning and asking questions.
Who was your editor on Raging Bull?
On Raging Bull, I got Thelma Schoonmaker to edit the film. And we've been editing every film since then.
Are you in the editing room with the editor?
Yes.
Every minute?
Every minute.
At the end of Raging Bull, this is what we see on the screen. So for the second time, the Pharisees summoned the man who had been blind and so forth. And the man replied, all I know is this. Once I was blind and now I can see. John 9, 24, 26. What's it telling us, Marty?
Well, it's about making judgment on other people. Judging other people. Judging other people and saying that person is a bad person. They did this, they did this, they did this. How do we know if we're not in that person's place, we wouldn't do the same?
Yeah.
That's all. Because I had a lot of people say about me over the years, and it's fine. The reality is, it's what I did. I can't run away from it. It's who I am. That's all. And what I am is up there on the screen.
Got one more thing to say on this before we move on.
Okay.
How old do you think James Lipton was when Inside the Actors Studio started?
68.
Incredible, Amit. He was exactly 68 years old.
Was it really?
Yeah,
okay.
Very well done. He's like been collecting Social Security for 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? Like he's 68 years old when he starts what ultimately becomes basically a podcast.
His entire obituary, yeah.
I do think it is important to understand it that way. If the New York Times is taking a dig in the first line of the obituary saying mostly admiring interviews, I think one of the ambiguities of podcasts is, are they journalism or not? I love and relate to him as a proto-podcaster.
Okay.
That's my number 3.
Wonderful. Okay. My number 4, his relationship to the Will Ferrell impersonation.
I'm so glad you brought this up.
So I've got to couch this because we do have a category in which we talk about impersonations, but this is too important and this is too big.
When one thinks of the greatest all-time films made by mankind, in this century or in any other, one name keeps coming up again and again and again and again.
If anyone knows James Lipton for anything, it is for the Will Ferrell impersonation.
Yes.
There's probably a lot more people that know that than they do the actual show or have ever seen a full episode of Inside the Actors Studio.
Yeah.
So what I love about it, though, is James Lipton loved the impression.
Yes.
Most of the time, if you're getting lampooned or impersonated, you have a neutral relationship to it, more likely a negative one.
Yeah.
But he loved it. He, in fact, said the words, I love it, I love it, I love it. He said the worst day of his life was the day that Will Ferrell decided to quit SNL.
I saw that.
So what he sees in that impersonation is he saw basically an elevation of himself.
Yeah.
By Will Ferrell choosing to mock him, that he was, in fact, elevating James Lipton. So it's not that you are making fun of me. It's saying you have chosen me as a subject of impersonation, and you have done nothing but elevate my profile, and I have so much gratitude for that.
Yeah.
That is such a weird but special relationship to somebody who does an impersonation or imitation of you. It was just such a complete twist of fate.
And I take him at his word here. When you rewatch them now, the thing that sticks out to me is not actually Will Ferrell's lyricism or his diction.
Yep.
It's his eyes for me. The way he'll kind of like hold his mouth open and stare out at the audience. gravitas, right?
Yes.
It's so perfect. He talks about when Will Ferrell came on Inside the Actors Studio, being in the makeup room with him, it was surreal to watch somebody next to me be put into makeup and become me.
Yes.
You know, like, can you imagine?
Yeah. So I just love that unexpected response.
There is also something about the Will Ferrell impersonation that to me really speaks to the difference between ego and confidence. I've been thinking about this a little bit with the Leslie Nielsen episode. The way Leslie Nielsen presents as funny in all the interviews after 1980, you know, we talked about this, is almost like there was an onus to be funny. James Lipton has a sense of humor. He laughs at himself and he knows how he's seen, how he's viewed as this, you know, stodgy, funny old academic man who happens to be interviewing the most famous people in the world.
Yes.
He can laugh at himself, but he's still a serious guy.
Yes.
Right? And I think that ego confidence balance in anybody is a kind of hard one to find.
Yeah, there's restraint. Restraint is a common thread between those two things.
Totally. So I think that actually goes along with the Will Ferrell impersonation. I'd like to hear you give one more to round out our 5.
Okay, my number 5 is no pre-interview.
Yeah.
So this has to do with his style of how he ran that class/show.
Yeah.
So traditionally in talk shows, there is a pre-interview to where the interviewee has a preview of the questions that are going to be asked. And so that way a conversation flows. There's not any sort of big surprises. And then the interviewee or whoever their party is has a say in the type of questions that they want asked.
Correct.
Right. So everything you're watching, you know, let's say it's on the Tonight Show or whatever, is semi-staged.
Lipton, at least for him, found that his method was to hold that sacred. We don't know where this is going. We are out there walking on a tightrope.
Correct. And so that is the thing I love, is that it imitates real life.
Yeah.
It's the unknown.
Yeah.
It's like James Lipton loved to use this analogy of like two people going up a ladder and they meet up on a tightrope. And that is what you're actually witnessing when you watch that show.
Yeah.
But what I like about it is the complete unexpected.
The fact is that if I have had 400 guests or 500, whatever it is, I have been face-to-face, privileged to be face-to-face with 400 or 500 entirely singular souls. And because there's no pre-interview, and because we're up on that high wire with no net for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, we're on a journey together that is, for me, the greatest privilege of my life.
And the second thing about this no pre-interview that is something I'll say that I love, but I'll get into this a little more, is the onus is all on James Lipton to do all of the homework before a show.
Totally.
And so the guy talked a lot about that his job was 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And it really, really was.
Yes.
Like those around him said that this is actually how much he put into it.
I mean, there's some, not that you and I are necessarily spending those kinds of hours,
Yes.
but there's definitely some James Lipton DNA in Famous and Gravy. He must have enjoyed the research. I think the same way you and I do.
Yeah.
You know, like I love learning about all this stuff along the way.
And so there's something to love about that work ethic.
Amen.
And because I admire it, I can say it's a thing I love.
All right, let's recap. So number 1, I said Jonathan Goldsmith nominee for most interesting man alive.
Yep. Number 2, I said lyricist.
Number 3, proto podcaster.
Very nice.
Number 4, you said
relationship to the Will Ferrell impersonation.
Yeah, and I added, which includes a balance between confidence and ego.
Yep.
And number 5, you said
no pre-interview.
Great list. All right, let's take a break.
Audible's best of 2024 picks are here. Discover the year's top audiobooks, podcasts, and originals in all your favorite genres. From memoirs and sci-fi to mysteries and thrillers, Audible's curated list in every category is the best way to hear 2024's best in audio entertainment. Like a stunning new full-cast production of George Orwell's 1984. Heartfelt memoirs like Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's Lovely One, the year's best fiction like The Women by Kristen Hanna, and Percival Everett's brilliantly subversive James. Another worthwhile listen is Amy Tintera's thrilling and twisting whodunit, Listen for the Lie. This laugh-out-loud funny tale follows Lucy, a woman who needs to clear her own name after a true crime podcast decides to probe into the worst night of her life, one she conveniently can't remember. Audible. There's more to imagine when you listen. Go to audible.com/WonderyPod and discover all the year's best waiting for you.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code AUDIO at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code AUDIO at BlueNile.com.
All right. Category 3, One Love. In this category, we each choose one word or phrase that characterizes this person's loving relationships. First, we will review the life data. So, James Lipton, 2 marriages. Marriage number 1, Nina Falk, 1954 to 1959. James was 28 when they got married. They divorced at age 33. Marriage number 2, Kedekai Turner, 1970. James was 44, and they were married up until his death. They were married just shy of 50 years.
Okay.
All right. No kids with either marriage. He made reference in his memoir to stepkids at one point, but he didn't talk at length about them.
And there's nothing really on the internet about them.
Yeah. And he had no siblings.
Yeah.
This is worth, so in the other relevant data worth noting, we mentioned his father, the famous beat poet, totally out of the picture.
Yeah, abandoned them when he was 6 or younger even.
Correct. And I mean, they were already struggling, and his mother was a teacher and then later, I think, a librarian. You know, they worked very hard to make ends meet. He was working by age 12 or 13 to contribute to the family funds.
Yeah.
And he talks about seeing his dad maybe a half dozen times or so.
Yeah.
So total MIA dad.
Deficient father.
Yeah, exactly. So what did you have for one word?
My one word, exaltation. Do you actually know what the word exaltation means?
No.
So it's got 2 definitions, both of which kind of fit here. It's the act of elevating someone into power or a state of extreme happiness. So I think it both works on both his relationship to the family as a child and to his relationship specifically with Kedekai.
Yeah.
So let me go backwards is the relationship with Kedekai. So you said before the most fun trivia is that she is Scarlet in Clue, or the model of Scarlet in Clue. So she actually was also a designer and illustrator.
And she's like Irish and Japanese.
Yeah,
like
she's beautiful.
Yes, she's stunning.
Yeah, and James Lipton did very well for himself.
He did very well for himself. They're an adorable couple. They look great.
They are.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm giving it an exaltation. This is a state of extreme happiness.
Yeah.
It looks like a perfect pairing. I mean, we're not just assuming this based on the pictures and the things that we see, but they were actually partners.
Yeah.
Right? Like she illustrated the book for Exaltation of Larks.
Correct.
And I love that. Like my parents worked together for almost their entire careers.
Yeah.
And that's hard, but it is incredibly admirable, and they have a rock solid relationship.
Totally. That is very self-evident, and he is putting her up on a pedestal every time he mentions her name. Like how lucky I am, how beautiful she is. He's just filled with gratitude every time he mentions his wife.
Yeah, and so the fact that they collaborated together, that's what I see as an exaltation.
Yeah.
Right, of this state of extreme happiness.
They also have a kind of, just for what it's worth, and it's not worth going into, a love at first sight origin story.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, and he actually kind of stole her away from somebody else she was dating at the time. But they had this like wonderful love affair and were married like 8 or 9 months later or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other definition of exaltation was the act of elevating someone into power. And so this was basically what he was forced into by the abandoned father, forced to become essentially a working child, but a working child actor, novelist, and copy boy, I believe, for the Detroit Free Press. By the way, both James Lipton and I from Detroit.
Oh, how about that? You and James Lipton.
Yeah, I was born there. We left by age 4, but there's so many similarities.
No, I see it.
Yeah, I mean, the Jonathan Goldsmith nomination and from Detroit. I mean, he and I are just right there.
Right there.
So there's my word, exaltation.
I love it. Yeah.
So I want to throw it back to you. What is your one word or phrase?
So it's interesting. I actually should have spent more time thinking about the marriage, but something that he said when he was on book tour, when he was doing this memoir, was how he discovered in the process of writing this book found family, and that he had been on a quest for found family for a long time.
I thought that I was immune from family. My mother and I were alone, and I thought that was it. That was the unit. And I didn't think in terms of family. I certainly didn't think in terms of a male parent. And about a third of the way through the book came this realization that all my life I've been trying to replace that. Not only the father figure, but the whole idea of family. That was, for me, the revelation of the book. I thought, oh my God, that's what I've been looking for.
I ended up going with Flying Circus. So Flying Circus, whenever I hear Flying Circus, I think Monty Python. So I like that association. But I was like, what is that phrase, actually? I'd never clicked into it. So I went to Merriam-Webster. An organized group of pilots engaged in public exhibition flying. He was a pilot. He was a licensed pilot. And he's... and
an equestrian.
And an equestrian, yes. Loved to ride horses. He's literally flying, but an organized group of pilots. I feel like that is the community he's in. He talks about all these interviews and the people behind the scenes and the people on stage who he is in community with in high fine art circles of New York. And there is a kind of flying high thing there. It's a bit of a public exhibition of flying. So his found family is ultimately a flying circus.
Okay. I like it.
All right. Category 4, net worth. In this category, Amit and I write down our best guess ahead of time. We're going to talk a little bit about our reasoning. We will look up the actual net worth number in real time. And finally, we will place this person on the Famous and Gravy net worth leaderboard. Amit Kapoor wrote down $6 million.
Okay, Michael Osborne wrote down 30 million. Oh, wow. We are definitely on two different polls.
We are on two different polls. Okay, before we look it up, I just want to say my reasoning a little bit.
Yep.
It needed to be a big number in my mind.
Why?
Just because he's got rich guy vibes. Part of it was Norman Mailer said, James, you really need to come by to the Actors Studio and learn about all these people. He had been a working actor, but he had transitioned into producing and directing and Broadway musicals, and he eventually worked for Bob Hope, who was one of the most important celebrities of the 20th century. I don't know if there's going to be time to go into it, but he develops this very close relationship with Bob Hope. He is just floating in very, very elite circles, and the vibes are such that I don't know where it's going to come from, but he is executive producer of Inside the Actors Studio.
Yes.
And Inside the Actors Studio basically made the Bravo network. It had like 6 million viewers at the start, and it grew to like 70 million.
125 worldwide.
Oh, there you go.
Like that, yeah.
So I feel like he had a tremendous amount of leverage as time went on. Also, not very many dependents. So I landed at 30.
So this is interesting, as our reasoning is actually not all that different.
Yeah, but you're better at this.
No, I think he has rich guy vibes, and I think he earned a decent amount. So Inside the Actors Studio, yes, it did make the Bravo network, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a commercial success.
Yeah.
Right? There's not a lot of Procter & Gamble trying to place themselves in ads in that show. So I don't think, and again, it was not his job as the host. It was his job as dean and professor. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that he was paid a lot. Even if he was paid for 275 episodes, even if he was paid 50 grand or so, that's what, 14 million.
Yeah.
Right. So,
but okay, when I say rich guy vibes, I also am assuming he handled his money well. I don't think you're invited onto boards unless you do. I mean, he rescued the Actors Studio.
Correct. Yeah. So I think he earned it. I mean, I think he earned a decent amount from Inside the Actors Studio.
Yeah.
Exaltation of Larks, which I've referred to a few times now, that was in print since 1968.
And now this is all adding up to 6 million for you.
Yes. And this is where I'm going to explain it. And then he's got rich guy vibes.
Yeah.
And I think he spent it.
Oh.
I think this is a guy that loved France. He was a Francophile. He loved horses, loved flying his own. It wasn't his own private jet.
He had the finest restaurants. This is not in question.
Yes, there's not much known about legacy or where he wanted to leave it.
Yeah.
There's not much evidence of charity other than the dramatic arts.
Damn it.
So I think he had it and he spent it.
This is very compelling. All right.
And this is pure speculation, right? And then I also love to look up endorsements because they're so funny to me. So he actually did quite a few. Geico is probably his best known one. We can link to that commercial. He also did DirecTV, Toyota, LG, and Intel.
All right. It's time to get to it. You ready?
Yep.
The final net worth number for James Lipton is $6 million.
Is it really?
Damn it.
Wow.
Very well done.
On the nose.
Unbelievable. I think,
I promise you that
confetti. That's incredible. Oh, man. Samsonite. I was way off. That's great. Oh, my God.
Okay, so the good news is we have a tie. He is tied with Bob Einstein, our only other $6 million person.
Oh, outstanding.
He did beat out Paul Rubens, who was at $5 million.
Yeah.
So that places him number 64, which is in the top 85% of Famous and Gravy, right? Our median still stands at 20 million. Our minus Perot average stands at 51 million.
And our mode is at 20 million as well, correct?
Correct. Yes. Both the median and the motor at 20 million.
All right.
So at 6 million, he sits just below Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Neil Armstrong.
Oh, wow.
Interesting cultural figures. And just above Paul Rubens, but also in that category would be Fred Willard and Oliver Sacks.
Incredible. I gotta say, really well done, Amit.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Category 5, Little Lebowski Urban Achievers.
They're the Little Lebowski Urban Achievers.
Yeah, the Achievers.
Yes, and proud we are of all of them.
In this category, we choose a trophy, an award, a cameo, an impersonation, or any other form of a hat tip that shows a different side of this person. I'll go first.
Yeah.
On March 17th, 2006, James Lipton made an appearance on the Conan O'Brien show where he shotgunned a beer.
This explains to me why I received a text message at 6 a.m. one morning a few days ago from you.
Happy weekend?
Yes.
And he doesn't just kind of shotgun the beer, right? Like he pierces it and he's holding it up to his mouth and then he like can't get it all down, so foam spills all over the place. But then he holds out his arms in the kind of like champion, yeah, just did it. Like he straight up shotguns a beer.
Thank you, Dean Lipton. Dean Lipton, everybody.
The reason I love this, the reason I chose it is this different side of him. Like, he knew how funny it would be as a man in, I think at this point, late 70s, 80s, to go on network TV for spring break and be like, we're shotgunning beers.
Yeah.
So that's my Little Lebowski.
Okay.
What do you got?
Mine was Arrested Development.
Perfect. Yes.
So he had a recurring role in Arrested Development, and there's a few fascinating things about this.
The warden. Yeah.
He played Warden Stefan Gentles, who was the warden of the prison in which the father, what was his name?
Oh, George Sr.
Yeah, George Sr. Bluth.
Yes.
George Bluth, where he was in prison. So he was a warden there, and he spent his free time daydreaming about becoming a screenwriter. So this was actually James Lipton's first acting in 50 years. And on Arrested Development, which was well known for its celebrity cameos, he was the first person on Arrested Development to not appear as himself, to actually play as a character. So there's this kind of fun little trivia. So how he talks about how he landed on this show was, it all starts with Will Ferrell, right? Will Ferrell elevated him into a whole new level of pop culture. What I also love about it is the out-of-characterness of it. So James Lipton is, what he liked to say a lot about his interviews on Inside the Actors Studio was he removed himself as much as he could. Like he said, he spoke probably less than any other interviewer and interjected less than any other interviewer. He let it be about the subject. His role as Warden Stefan Gentles was to interject at every possible moment to try to push his screenplays on any character that would let him, that would indulge him for even a millisecond.
You know, it's funny, like, there is a kind of awareness that this is all fun from here on out.
Yes.
I'm working my ass off on the show and I want it to be the best thing it can be, but it is for the students and all this other stuff is just like, you know, is gravy.
Yes.
All right.
Hey, Prime members, have you heard? You can listen to your favorite podcasts ad-free? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free-podcast. That's amazon.com/ad-free-podcast to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Why get all your holiday decorations delivered through Instacart? Because maybe you only bought 2 wreaths but have 12 windows. Or maybe your toddler got very eager with the advent calendar. Or maybe the inflatable snowman didn't make it through the snowstorm. Or maybe the twinkle lights aren't twinkling. Whatever the reason, this season, Instacart's here for hosts and their whole holiday haul. Get decorations from the Home Depot, CVS, and more through Instacart and enjoy free delivery on your first 3 orders. Service fees and terms apply.
Category 8, words to live by. In this category, we choose a quote. These are either words that came out of this person's mouth or was said about them. You go first.
So in an interview in 2006, he was asked about Inside the Actors Studio and about methods. So in the
methods or method? I mean, this gets kind of ambiguous because people talk about the method. Even though it is methods.
Perfect. I'm glad you asked that. So let's say method, right? So correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's called the Stanislavski method.
Yes, but there are adaptations and interpretations of it, and there's not any kind of claim that's the only way to do it, but the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, so a singular method, if I'm going to be a little reductionist, is taught throughout that. So he gave a quote that says, talking about the show, he says, I've had 200 guests and 200 methods.
Yeah.
And that is my quote. That is my words to live by. 200 guests and 200 methods. Because what that speaks to is what James Lipton likes to talk about is the tributaries, the non-singularity of the realm of acting, is that you can study under a single method, but essentially it's all customized to your own. So if I'm going to expand that on, it's talking about the uniqueness of each individual as they perform a profession. So let's just stop talking about acting for a second, right? Let's say if we're talking about insurance salesmen, we're talking about engineers. Everybody has their own method. Everyone may study under and get a certain degree of how to do a certain job, but the way that they actually do it is their own method. There is nobody out there that is actually doing the exact same job. We are all doing different methods of a possibly similar job. And so I like that as a shift perspective on just how to think about employment. Right? That we're not all doing jobs. We're all doing our own method of a job. And I didn't really think about that until I heard James Lipton say, I've had 200 people who have studied under a single method, perhaps, but I've actually had 200 different methods on this show.
That's cool, man. That's a good one.
Thank you. All right. Your words to live by.
Geniuses always think it's easier than we make it out to be.
Than we.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the representation of we. I like that you locked on than we do. When you see real genius... not
the movie,
the Val Kilmer movie,
yes,
with Laszlo Holyfield. No,
yes,
not real genius. When you see actual genius on display, there is a seamlessness about it. Really, really talented people make it look easy, and that's so confusing.
Yes,
I mean, if you watch great athletes, if you watch great actors, if you watch masterful politicians or skilled entrepreneurs or you name it, people who have a genius for a thing display it with a seamlessness, and they think in their mind it comes so naturally that they think it's easier than we make it out to be. I like that. I like that reminder that if you want to recognize genius, part of what it presents as is it looks easy, and it's not.
Yeah. I like it.
Those are my words to live by.
Very nice.
Category 7, man in the mirror. This category is fairly simple. Did this person like their reflection, yes or no? This is not about beauty, but rather a question of self-confidence versus self-judgment.
This is a hard one.
You thought this was hard?
Yes.
Oh, dude, I went yes, obviously. No question.
Hey, we're going to get to have a little debate here. Do you find him believable?
Very.
You do?
Actually, that's a good question. Let me sit with that for a second. It does seem, if you know the life story and the humble origins and the fact that he was not living a life of great wealth for a lot of his life, I mean, he is sort of trying to fit in what are very exclusive circles.
Yeah.
There is a kind of face you have to put on that. And if I stop and think about, his origins and his destiny and where he landed, as soon as you raise it, I hadn't thought about this until just now, but yeah, actually, maybe there is a little bit of
an affront.
There's a front.
That's what I was concerned about, is the guardedness of it. And especially a guy whose entire first line of the obituary talks about a show in which he encourages people to become unguarded. Yet he himself, with the exception of shotgunning an old style on Conan, is a pretty guarded guy. Certainly on the show, he is very guarded. And so there is that little bit of contradiction. There is this, I wouldn't say holier than thou, because that's unfair, but let's go back to what you said, rich guy vibes that he kind of has.
It's not even just holier than thou. I mean, you see him as being a kind of foot soldier for exclusivity.
Yes.
In a way.
Totally.
Stella was, I think, she was the best teacher I ever had of anything. At the core of it was this steely technique which she had acquired over many years, which she had acquired, in fact, from Stanislavski himself. And then she came back to New York, and there were all of her colleagues at the group theater. This was a group, of course, that had changed everything in America. The group theater had brought the Stanislavski system into America, and they were waiting for her. And they said, well, what did the master have to say?
And she said, he's abandoned emotional memory. Now, that may be meaningless to anybody listening to this, but to an actor, it has some meaning.
And so that's
that's a really
what
good
I'm
point.
wondering. And he was also this big Francophile, right? Like, I just think he completely regrets that he was like born and lived in America.
You're onto something here. Damn it. You're really onto something here.
Yeah. The guardedness.
The guardedness is actually kind of, it's a little more superficial than I care to admit.
Yeah. I mean, the phrase I wrote down is he's trying really hard to be himself. So I don't know if I'm going to answer the binary, and I don't do this very often, of does he like his reflection in the mirror? I think the guy is absolutely self-accepting. I think he's got gratitude. I think he's got gratitude. I think he likes himself, but I think he's trying too hard to be himself. And so with that, I said no to Man in the Mirror.
It's a really, really compelling case. And I think you're in my head about it now. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if I were to flip my answer, theoretically, if I were to hypothetically say you've won me over with your argument, I don't want that to be misinterpreted as actually this guy is full of insecurity or
no way.
Right. But there is a playing a part here.
Yes.
That when you look at it, it does lend itself to parody. It's almost like if you were going to go into a factory and say, we need to create somebody who's going to be the dean of an art school for actors. What would that person look like? This is what you would come up with.
Yes, exactly.
Right. I mean,
he would go into wardrobe and come out looking like himself.
Like James Lipton. Yeah. I mean, he's the perfect guy for that moment in a way.
Yeah.
I am going to change my answer. I think you're right. I don't think he likes his reflection.
I should have been a lawyer turned.
Yeah, you should have been
turned actor turned dean.
Not too late. Look, you've James Lipton didn't find his calling until 68 years old.
I can't wait that long.
All I'm saying is there's time. All right. Category 8, coffee, cocktail, or cannabis. This is where we ask, which one would we most want to do with our dead celebrity? What do you got?
I got cannabis with James Lipton.
I had the same thing.
Okay. So poor Jimmy's going to be pretty high.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he'd enjoy that. If shotgunning that old style was any indication, then he may be up for this.
How did you reason this out?
To me, it's the drive that I'm really, really curious about. Right. So we talked about the interview prep that he did, what he claims to be 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to get ready for each of these interviews. This man had incredible devotion to his job, which means incredible devotion to his love of the craft.
Yeah.
I want to know where the hell that comes from. Like, that is something that is so opposite of what I get to experience.
I have a theory on it, though.
Okay.
I think it's joy of learning.
Yeah, you think he has that much joy of learning?
I do think that he is an educator. This is why he was dean of that school for so long. I think he sees his role in life to represent what it means to be a lifelong student and to admire a craft deeply. And I think he sees every book he reads and every article he reads and all the research he does as furthering that mission. And I get into a flow state with that. I relate to that.
That much?
I think I would, man. I mean, I love doing our podcast for exactly this reason. It reflects back on things that I'm seeing that reveal a deeper humanity. Those points where I can relate, and maybe I don't achieve excellence or genius. I don't think I'll ever make it look easy.
Yeah.
I don't make anything look easy. I think I make everything look hard. But I connect, I connect with my own mind. I connect with somebody else's experience. I get lost in story. I don't see that as burdensome. I do think that to be a great educator, you do have to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah, but to have that degree of drive. So that's where I don't think.
What else is he doing?
Going to France, eating cheese. I don't doubt your speculation in your answer, but I want to hear it from him. And because of what I said in Man in the Mirror about guardedness, I don't think coffee is going to give me the direct answer.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's a pretty good drinker, so I think he's going to keep up the guard.
Right.
But it's got to be sort of that kind of free-flowing creative weed that I think he's going to explain to me a little more exactly what that drive is. And maybe I'm just not curious about how he gets that work ethic, but why he loves that craft so much. And I think he would have a very colorful, lyrical answer to it.
I agree with that. My reason for cannabis is not so different. It is not born quite as much out of curiosity so much as I think I would really enjoy his company. So it's still very much in my head what you had to say in Man in the Mirror, that there is a guardedness and that he is kind of playing a part. I think I enjoy the part.
Yeah.
And I've been around people who are playing a part kind of like that. And I enjoy their company. If they have a big basket of stories waiting in the weeds and you are able to pluck some of them out and like, did I ever tell you about this time with that person? I would love to just have a kind of enhanced and embodied experience. I was kind of thinking edibles might be the right way to go here. I don't know. This category is always a little problematic for me as a sober guy.
Yes.
Of everything I've given up, kind of miss weed the most, you know?
But, yeah, you did have 7 cups of coffee this morning. So.
Of the 2 out of 3 things that I no longer partake in, but of everything I miss pot the most. And this is one of those figures where I think I would just enjoy it. I think I would enjoy almost like if he is engaged in some sort of pretend about who he is and the circles he inhabits and the life he's living.
Yeah.
I'm here for that. I don't know. We all have an exterior that we're playing. And so this is a story about who he is, born out of insecurities and maybe born out of even childhood trauma. Who knows? I don't know that I have a problem with it. And I think I actually would enjoy it. And I just think the stories would be incredible. I mean,
there's no doubt.
We have barely touched the tip of the iceberg with the kinds of people who he got to know. One of my favorite parts of this book is he talks about how Bob Hope, I don't know much about Bob Hope other than he was a super big deal. Yeah. Bob Hope, because of his profession, was always like winding down at 11 or 12. And he would say, "You good to go for a walk?" And Lipton talks about going on these walks in Paris and Beijing and Shanghai and London, like Palm Springs, like these midnight walks with Bob Hope where he would let his guard down and they'd have just this mano-a-mano conversation, you know? Anyway, I just want the hang.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
Category 9, the Vanderbeek. Final category named after James Vanderbeek, who famously said in Varsity Blues,
"I don't want your life."
In that Varsity Blues scene, James makes a judgment that he does not want a certain kind of life based on a single characteristic. So here, Amit and I will form a rebuttal to anyone skeptical of how James Lipton lived.
Why wouldn't James want James' life?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, because you and I like to start with a counter argument before we like sort of make the case.
I mean, it's the airs about him.
What do you mean?
The pompousness, the perceived pompousness.
He doesn't want to be read as pompous?
Yes, or to be like that academic.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a better word. It's like
eggheady.
So eggheady.
Yeah.
So eggheady and academic.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's so much so that it's a joke.
Yeah.
And a well-established joke. In fact, the joke is almost bigger than the reality.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else?
I mean, I've said myself the work week. I'm just so like baffled by it.
Yeah. Okay, so this is maybe part of the counter argument too, and maybe this goes back to what you were saying earlier. The work week, maybe he's working a lot. These are hard hours, but is it that a life of the mind has limited appeal to you? Because this does seem like a life of the mind.
It does have limited appeal to me.
Okay, so maybe that's part of it too. So it's not just that he's pompous. It's actually that he is maybe gone a little too far in life of the mind.
Yeah, I think that encompasses both of those pretty well.
Yeah. Well, then let's mount the counter argument.
Yeah.
Here's what I like about the idea of life of a mind.
Okay.
It's not so locked in with what's going on with the body. I want to be able to have interest and explore interests and indulge in curiosities that are not only locked into what my body is capable of. This is something I absolutely think about with aging and longevity.
And that's what limitlessness is.
Totally.
Yes.
And I don't know if we've emphasized it enough. 68 years old when he finally breaks through into public consciousness. That we've talked about late in life successes. This is like one of the latest in life. I mean, Leslie Nielsen was 54, for Christ's sake. 62 when he did Naked Gun. He's older than that. Can you think of anybody else who compares in terms of we didn't really know who this person was? I mean, I guess it's
the guy that played Jonathan Goldsmith, maybe.
Yeah, well, maybe.
Or sorry, no, Jonathan Goldsmith was his name. He played the most interesting man in the world.
He played the most interesting man in the world. So the first thing I would say is that to have interest and curiosity, if you ask me, very, very desirable.
I think if you put it in terms of limitlessness, I could totally see that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think for him, it's also like he loved it so much.
Yes.
Right. And there is evidence, true, that there is dopamine released every time you learn.
I think so.
If the guy is really that devoted and learning that much, there is actually a felt happiness within him.
I also think, I don't know if he arrived in a place of wisdom, but I think he's seeking that. If you ask me, centering curiosity in your life, no matter what else, zero out everything else and say, I'm going to center curiosity in my life. I'm very persuaded at this point point in my life, always a good idea.
One thing also that didn't come up yet is his lifelong wish was realized. What he talked about endlessly that said that like his work is final or the greatest day of his life, I believe was the word he used, is that when he has a guest on Inside the Actor Studio who is actually a graduate of the program and was in the class.
Yeah.
And that finally happened with Bradley Cooper.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And every interview he ever gave leading up to that was always like the greatest day of my life will be this.
Yeah.
And if you are somebody who literally says the greatest day of my life will be some hypothetical and that hypothetical is realized, my God, man, like that's pretty huge.
Very few people can claim that. I'll give another thing. I mean, I do think while there may be some pompousness and maybe even some hiding behind a kind of character here, this is still a fascinating life.
Yeah.
The stories he has, I mean, don't you want that? Like, don't you want an unbelievable, limitless bank of stories?
Yes.
And bear witness to stories and firsthand knowledge of stories.
Yeah.
All right. Like this was fun.
Yeah. And he had fun with it. So there's the obvious things that were fun. Yes, like producing presidential galas, going to China to produce the first special over there with Bob Hope, writing musicals, all these things. Those are fun stuff. But even having fun with his own character
along
later
the way,
on in Arrested Development, in The Simpsons, on Conan, and all that.
Voice of Bolt on that comic or that cartoon. Yeah.
Yeah. So fascinating and fun.
Yeah. I also think there's a strong legacy argument. The 20th century is defined by TV and film. And he got some of the greatest producers, actors, creators of all time in a very intimate setting. Like, what a collection.
Yeah.
You know, what an archive.
And the moments that came out with that, we barely got to even scratch that at all. But the Jack Lemmon admitting he's an alcoholic, Dave Chappelle explaining why he left the Chappelle Show,
for Africa,
Spike Lee crying for probably the first and only time on television.
Totally. Like, I mean, there were real, genuine revelations and lessons. And I think that's what I mean by archive. Like, what a gift. What a thing to have done.
Yeah.
So I think that's it.
Okay.
I think those are the arguments. So what did we say?
That's a lot to wrap up, isn't it?
It is. We said
limitless. I like
limitless curiosity. Let's just go with limitless curiosity as thing number one. Thing number two, we said rich bank of stories, like just a fascinating life.
Yeah, and fun and fascinating
life. Number three, realized his ultimate accomplishment. And number four, a legacy of honoring a craft that he was in love with.
Yeah.
At the archives.
Pretty darn good. Okay, are you going to do it or am I?
You take it.
Okay. James Vanderbeek, I'm James Lipton, and you might want my life.
All right, speed round. Plugs for past shows. What do you got?
This has got all my Angelou written all around it. Like thought so one-dimensional, and then you get into just like paragraph 2, and you got oh my God vibes.
I want to go with Roger Ebert, which I haven't listened to in a while, and I know there's at least one line in there that I regret. But I think the Roger Ebert episode is a good one. Sorry, Maya Angelou was called
Poetic Justice. Roger Ebert was called Darling's Critic.
Darling's Critic. So check out Poetic Justice with Maya Angelou and Darling's Critic with Roger Ebert. Here is a little teaser for the next episode of Famous and Gravy. During the course of his career, he overcame numerous personal trials. He was arrested several times. He weathered serious tax problems, a heart attack, and 2 open-heart surgeries.
Let's see. Of course, I think getting arrested a bunch is Lenny Bruce.
Famous and Gravy listeners, we love hearing from you. If you want to reach out with a comment, question, or to participate in our opening quiz, email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. You will hear back from one of the 2 of us. In our show notes, we include all kinds of links, including to our website and social channels. Famous and Gravy is created and co-hosted by Michael Osborne and me, Amit Kapoor. This episode was produced by Megan Palmer with original music by Kevin Strang. Thanks, and see you next time.
Follow Famous and Gravy on the Wondery app. You can listen to more episodes early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at Wondery.com/survey.